Esto es Warp Talks, el podcast de Warp, en el que creamos un espacio de diálogo vivo con los nombres que marcan el ritmo en las diferentes industrias creativas alrededor del mundo.
Hey Rachel, are you excited because of this new album? The first in 6 years. It almost feels like it is like a second comeback, right? It's like a long time since the last one.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, it kind of is like that, isn't it? It's funny because it doesn't feel like 6 years really, but obviously a lot's happened in that in the last 6 years. So yeah, it's going to be good to get. Well, it already has been good this year so far because we've just come back from Australia and done a few festivals, so it's been nice to be back out playing again.
And how do you feel about this next album? Are you excited to share it finally?
Yeah, definitely. I can't believe it's finally coming out. Yeah, I'm excited for people to hear it. It's not even that long now, is it? It's about two weeks-ish?
2 weeks.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that, yeah. So, yeah, everything's gone a bit crazy, busy after, a calm on the work front for Slowdive. Publicly anyway, for the last 2 years, it's now just going a bit mad. So, but it's good.
Well, for the preparing of this interview, I saw the Pitchfork documentary, and in there I was like pretty surprised when Neil says that Slowdive connect with teenagers because you were teenagers at the time and you deliver a kind of feeling and a kind of atmosphere that it was like important for young people to have. And I was wondering, well, the self-titled album for me, it delivers the same kind of feelings, like the same kind of atmosphere in a different way, but the main emotional tone is there. And I want to ask you, well, he justified that you could make that feeling because you were teenagers at the time, but when you came back, you were very grown adults. So I want to know, how do you manage to get that feeling, to deliver this emotional, teenager, youthful kind of being?
I don't know, really. I think maybe it's not just a teenage feeling. Maybe it's just a Slowdive feeling. I mean, that's the only way. How else do you quantify it? I don't know. I don't think we certainly don't. Sorry, there's a wasp. We certainly don't like set out to do a specific thing when we make music.
Sure.
It's just very much the feel of the band, and I guess the way we've always been. And it's still been very apparent this year from the shows that we have done that we still have a lot of younger people coming to see us play, like really young. In Auckland, I think there was a 12-year-old in front of me and Christian, which was astonishing. I've never seen anyone other than our own children of that age Slowdive gig. So it's quite weird. It's but then you look at the front row and predominantly it's teenagers. But it just reminds me of me at that age when I used to go to gigs and I would be right down the front barrier. Me and Nick used to go to a lot of shows together in London, and it's nice. But then, but obviously there are people our age there as well, so it is very cross-generational. And I just, I couldn't tell you why that still is with the newer stuff, but obviously it just is resonating with kids, and I don't know.
That's good. I have like this belief that talking to teenagers or to young people, it's like more important because they are like more open to learn about experiences, right? And what you have to show to them in a way. So you make a bigger impression than on adults. If you have like the possibility to talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. What was I going to say? Yeah, I guess it's kind of weird. I don't know. I think back to when I was a teenager. I'm thinking about the bands that I loved, and I don't think there were any bands. I mean, there was like the Velvet Underground. I think we were discussing this the other day, that when the Velvet Underground reformed, they were around the age of 40. So a similar age to us when we reformed. And it's strange thinking of it, you know, like that. I don't know what year they reformed, obviously when we were a lot younger. And in the early days, they were a band that, you know, we listened to and would have been part of the original influence, I guess, when we first started doing music together. But yeah, it's just like thinking about people that are. It's like I look at stuff online now of women that are 20 years older than me now, like in their 70s or 80s, and I suppose the wonderful thing about places like Instagram is that some of those women are there, and the women that are not your typical 70, 80-year-old,
Yeah, sure.
you know, what you would imagine you turn into at that age with your blue rinses and your awful, you know, granny clothes. But there are women older that are like, I don't know, the misfits or tattooed, or they still remain weird. Yeah, I've seen like photographs from the 1930s of a group of women. I mean, it looks like they could have been in sort of the grunge era of the 90s. And it's really weird as you get older, when you kind of become more aware of a lot of stuff that you're not when you're really young, I think, or in my experience. But as you say, maybe the younger generation now they're looking at bands of our age and see it quite differently.
Yeah, I remember, well, when I was a teenager, Slowdive was one of the biggest influences on the musical circuits that I was in. There were a lot of shoegaze and grungy Mexican bands at the time that were like very popular. So for me, it was like, yeah, it's like interesting because it is also like a connection to my teenager years, but I am not C and I'm not from your generation. So Slowdive seems to be like on every generation of adolescents. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I was interviewed by somebody the other day, and I was talking about this, and we were talking about Nick Cave. And he was saying that at Nick Cave gigs now, you also get a lot of much, much younger people at Nick Cave shows as well. And I think he's a really good example of an artist that really gives back to his fans, like the Red Hand file.
Yeah.
That he does. I mean, I signed up to those when he started doing them, and they're fantastic. And he really gives like a lifeline to a lot of younger people, and sharing his experiences and his wisdom and his thoughts of where he is at now in his life. I mean, I find it quite fascinating.
You could do that.
But I think me, I don't know. I'm not Nick Cave. I think like him and Dave Grohl specifically, those two artists, the two people that really give back to their fans in a way that, I mean, maybe there are other artists that do, but that are noticeable to me anyway. The way they interact with their fans, I think is really quite special. I don't know whether I'd be good at. I'm not as philosophical as Nick Cave, I don't think, but I don't know. Probably wouldn't be as good.
Did you wrote to him through the red files?
No, I keep thinking about writing to him because I know I've heard that he doesn't understand shoegaze music. He doesn't like it. And he also doesn't like hats. He thinks, hats are a pointless thing. So somebody's already written to him, and I like hats and things like that. And somebody's already asked the question, why don't you like hats? And he did answer that question. But I am so tempted to write to him and just say, why don't you like shoegaze? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, considering the questions he gets asked and that he answers, I mean, that's really low priority, obviously. But I'd be fascinated to hear his response, because I've got a friend who is a milliner. She makes hats and is a huge Nick Cave fan. And we were commiserating after he'd sent out this email about a year ago, I think. Going, oh my God, he doesn't like hats and he doesn't like shoegaze. I mean, but we still love him anyway. It doesn't matter. It's quite funny.
It's impossible not to like him.
I know. He's one of life's genuine gems, I think. He really cares about people and humanity, and that's a beautiful thing, I think, in anybody.
Well, now that we're talking about shoegaze, I have always had like this confusion about genres, because I think one of the most confusing genres have ever existed is dream pop, right? I don't know. To describe like which is the difference between shoegaze and dream pop.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I've been asking people this question as well, because I don't know the answer. I can't help you. I don't know. I have asked a few interviewers this. I'm like, what is the difference? Because sometimes I see us, obviously we have like the shoegaze tag, but sometimes I see dream pop referred to in stuff about us, and then I get really confused. I'm like, what's the difference between the two? I don't know. Ask Neil. He won't know either. Probably.
Well, I'm going to ask him. Maybe we could make a reel about you two don't know what's the difference, so it would be funny. Because I suppose everybody has like that question in mind, right? It's like a genre that shouldn't exist, like dream pop. Just say shoegaze and that's it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there must be some kind of difference, but I don't know what it is. Is it that I don't know. Are the vocals higher in dream pop? Are they more clear? Is it more poppy? It's called dream pop.
People say that it is more poppy, but I don't know. Yeah, for me, it's like there are pop songs on albums also. So
yeah. I mean, I think generally we always have the odd, as pop as Slowdive will ever get. There's always one or two per record that kind of fit that bill.
When you wrote that songs, more popular songs, you made it on conscious or just come up from nowhere?
You'll have to ask Neil that question, because he writes the songs. So, I think there's always there is always a pop element with Neil at some point, and like songs like Alison and When the Sun Hits and Star Roving, Sugar for the Pill, Kisses on this record, and A Life as well. Those are, like when you're recording, there's always a point where certain songs will be the ones that go to radio or are the singles, even though that doesn't really exist so much these days. But there's always obvious tracks that fit that, and I think he writes, pretty good shoegaze pop songs.
Yeah.
Got good melodies.
Well, I have like this question. When you came back as a Slowdive, you make a really like a Slowdive type of record, in my opinion. Like it was like very classic. And well, you said a little while ago that it was maybe this feeling that it is on the band, right? Like on you. But I have also like heard a lot of Mojave Tree records, and they are like very different. So yeah, experimental in such a way that Slowdive have never delivered in a way on instruments and on a structure approach and all that kind of stuff. So I want to know, when you recorded the self-titled record, you have like in mind to make a Slowdive type of record, and because it is like
yeah, I don't think with either of these records that that's been a like, oh, it needs to sound like Slowdive. In fact, I think with the first album that we came back with, it was very much we didn't have any pressure to make a new record, only the pressure that we may have put on ourselves. But really at that point it was, well, so I'm just feeding my son here whilst we're talking. It was very much a case of, let's just go in the studio and see what happens, and if we like it, we'll put it out, and if we don't, we won't say any more about it, And obviously we enjoyed the process and that record came out. But I think by default, when you get 5 of us in a room, it's always going to sound to a certain extent like Slowdive. I mean, how can it not? That's just what happens when it's the 5 of us. I think this record is a little bit different, obviously, with the more electronic elements, and these songs were born out of a lot of demos that Neil had, written when he was thinking about doing the solo record, which is, I don't know whether he's finished that now, but I mean, obviously we kind of got to the point of, we should do another record, and it was these songs that he came to us with. And I think there were about maybe 30 different tracks, some of them more fully formed than others. And we whittled it down maybe to about 14, I think, that we were working on, and then whittled it down further to the 8 that are on the record. So, it's a fairly slow process, and he was working on these songs probably for about a year before we heard anything.
Oh, yeah. He took
and I remember at the beginning, the first song we heard was Shanty, which obviously is very different with the arpeggiator on it and the electronics. And like Nick in our band is very kind of traditional in the music he likes. We always just joke that the only band he really loves is The Cure. He does like other bands, but he's, very, he's not like really into electronic music or more experimental stuff, whereas Neil obviously is. Simon is. Simon does a lot of different things. Christian does a lot of different things as well. But I remember with the electronic stuff, Nick was more like, it doesn't sound like Slowdive. And I remember Neil saying, it doesn't have to sound like Slowdive, just has to be good.
Yeah.
And he's right, there wasn't like that. If anything, maybe Neil might have kicked against that a little bit because of that. But I mean, it's identifiably a Slowdive record.
Yeah.
I think, but it's got elements in it that are different as well. So it's got a few different bits and bobs.
It's interesting because I have read commentaries from that song in particular, and they compare it exactly to 2 things that you said here. Some of them compare it a little bit to the pornography era of The Cure because of the guitar.
Yeah.
And well,
I mean that was definitely a reference point. Yeah.
Oh.
It's a great record. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's, in my opinion, the best record from The Cure.
Mm-hmm.
And
mine's Disintegration, but yeah.
No, Disintegration is also great. For me, they are on the same level, but I like more pornography. I think it's more edge in a way.
Yeah. It's definitely a darker record. Much darker pornography.
Yeah. Well, and the other example that people compare to this song is Pygmalion, right? That it's like an electronic record. And also sounds like Slowdive, but it was...
Yeah. I think it's a mishmash of all of those things. It's funny, I've seen the Pygmalion reference quite a lot, and obviously down to the electronic elements in the record. And it's I think if Neil, I mean, Slowdive definitely runs on a democracy. With everything that we do, it's like the majority vote is what happens, basically, down to what mixes have ended up on the record, the songs that have ended up on the record, what we choose to do live. Every decision around Slowdive is the majority vote. Sometimes we'll get 5 of us agree, and that's great, but we're all very different people. So a lot of the times you might just get 3 of us agree, and then the other 2 are a bit like, but you just kind of take it on the chin and sort of crack on with it. And I think if Neil had complete control over this record, it would have been much more electronic than it is.
That's what happened when you recorded Pygmalion, right? That it was almost like a Neil record in a way.
Yeah, more so then, because by that point the band was quite fractured. Simon had already left. Nick and Christian were just not interested, and didn't, just didn't like what Neil was doing. Ironically, now Simon says that's his favourite Slowdive album, and he's not on it. And he left because he thought he was being replaced by a drum machine. But I was kind of fairly neutral. I was in the studio for the majority of the recording of that album. And we're still, and I think, probably that's why Neil and I carried on with Mojave 3. There was still that desire to make music, no matter kind of how hard it got. I mean, by Pygmalion, we had no money. Nobody at the label liked us, it was, and nobody really wanted to see us live. Just kind of sort of cracked on with it, and I don't blame Nick and Christian for not wanting to do it anymore, because it wasn't fun by that point. It was quite dark and quite difficult at certain points. So yeah, I mean, Slowdive's we're very different now. Obviously 30 years have passed, and it's just different. We just get on a lot better. Obviously the band is pretty successful, and we can go out and do shows, and it's so different to how it was back then, in a good way. And now, next year will be 10 years since we came back, and we're already together longer now than we were originally, and we enjoy it. So we continue to do it whilst we enjoy it and we have our health.
That's great. Now that we were talking about the teenager connection, the connection to the youth, I want to know, what does your children think about your music?
Well, my son is deaf, so he can't hear our music at all. He's got no hearing. So I couldn't tell you what he thinks of it. He's been to 2 gigs, and obviously he can feel the vibrations of the music.
Sure.
He's not run away at those gigs. He's stayed there and watched it and come backstage afterwards, most recently just before Glastonbury, and was just staring at me, up and down, as if to say, not used to seeing you like this. This is quite weird. And he insisted on watching the gig through a phone. He wouldn't watch it. No, I know, he's deaf and he's got additional needs, so it's kind of strange. He watched it through a camera on the phone. He wouldn't watch it as it was. I don't know, but I think the other band members' kids, I don't know that they particularly are into Slowdive. they're kind of, some of them are at that age now where they're starting to come to the shows. They're sort of like 15, 16. I think Christian, one of his, I think the kids are obviously a lot more aware now what their dads do.
Sure.
And they're like, okay, they understand it, and they see on, I don't know, whatever, TikTok or whatever, they see Slowdive stuff, and they're like, okay. And some of their school friends like Slowdive, but Christian said he went to pick up, I think, his son fairly recently, and there was another kid in his year there was like, oh, I've heard your dad's band and they're shit. So it's quite funny. I mean, I guess they kind of have to bear the consequences of what their parents are doing. So yeah, but some of them come to shows and really enjoy it. Some of them like it. I guess some of them are not bothered.
Yeah.
But yeah, it must be a strange thing. It must be strange, children, to see their parents doing that.
Yeah, it should be strange. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, to have like that position, and maybe later having like friends using your dad's band T-shirt or something like that would be kind of weird.
Yeah. And I think it's right, and it's also funny when Slowdive tunes get into
video games or things like that, right?
Yeah, that, and then there was some, like, I can't remember what it is, some like teen thing on Netflix that's been on recently. Obviously I haven't watched it because it's not aimed at me, but Don't Know Why is the last song played on the last episode of the series, like the big exit scene, and Nick's daughter was like, all her friends were like all over it. She's 12. They were all like, whatever program it was. So there's that, and I think that's quite funny. So I just kind of lived through the rest of the band's kids, and hear what they say. So it's funny.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. Well, I have like this question that, well, you started relearning your songs when this Primavera Sound reunion happened, right? Through YouTube videos. I want to know, like, what have you learned from your songs, from your own show through these years, from relearning it through to the present, that has made you maybe change a little bit your approach on giving concerts?
I think we're a lot more confident now than we were when we originally came back, and obviously we're used to playing to a lot more people, which we definitely weren't when we first came back. And I just think, I mean, personally, for me, I'm where I wouldn't have been when I was 20 years old doing it at gigs. Now I am very aware that people have paid money to come and see us and, want to do a good gig, and it's really important that we do our best when we play live, really. And the difference now is I have in-ear monitors, so I can actually hear myself properly, whereas back then I definitely couldn't. It was always like struggling above guitars and drums, and that's also very different. I think we're just a bit more conscientious. I mean, so far we've never used any backing tape, so we're always a live band when we play, and there will always at some point be some element of shambolic there. Somebody will do something wrong, or so there's always still that element of you don't quite know how it's going to really go, because you're relying on everybody being able to hear each other properly. And actually the rest of the band now are just about to go on in-ear monitors. I've been trying to get them on in-ears for the last few years. The same for me, it was quite life-changing in terms of doing live shows, to have my own, separate mix. Whereas, there's definitely points where the rest of them are struggling with X, Y, Z at each gig, and now they've all had their molds done. We're just waiting. So the American tour that we start in September will be the first time everybody will be on in-ear monitors. So that'll be interesting. It'd be a lot quieter on stage as a result, I think, which can only be a good thing, probably.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Save everybody's hearing.
Rachel, I have like this question. I know that you have like that Slowdive was like very bad treated by the UK press on the 90s, but now that you have like become like a very respected, acclaimed, and even influential musical act, do you have like another opinion of the press, or?
No, I mean, I don't really have any. All the stuff back, then it was just a small amount of journalists in the UK that didn't like us, but had a huge amount of power. Huge amount of power, obviously, because there was no internet and stuff. And now it's very different. So I don't really have an opinion either way. I mean, the lovely thing is now everybody can make their own mind up about whatever band just by going and finding them on whatever platform they want to find them on. And that's great. You're not reliant on one person's opinion. So that's good.
That you get to experience more, right? Now that you can have like all music on your computer or on your cell phone, you don't need to depend. Yeah, it's better. It's
exactly. It's so much better. I mean, back in, when I was growing up, obviously no internet. I would read the music, Melody Maker, NME, Sounds. I would buy them every week and read them cover to cover and decide what bands I was going to buy records from based on reviews in those papers. They were really influential and really did dictate the sort of the music fashions in the UK. So it's completely different. I think, the internet is a blessing and a curse for obvious reasons, but I think as far as our music goes, it's been a blessing because here we still are.
Yeah.
Or here we are 3 decades later talking about those early records and just about to release a new one now. So, thanks to everyone that's listened to us and discovered us and continues to discover us and come to gigs and all of that stuff. We wouldn't be here without everybody else, really.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, I need to finish this interview now, but I want to make a play with you to finish this. This is like a psychological game. We're going to make a story together. So let's go.
Oh, okay.
Like you are in a forest, right? In the middle of nowhere. I want you to describe me the forest, how it is like.
Oh, the forest is like a tropical forest and very lush, with a waterfall, a huge waterfall, and a massive pool of water you can swim in, which is really warm and beautiful, and lots of brightly coloured birds flying around.
Maybe there's like one animal that came close to you that maybe pop up your eyes that you want to get near to it. Which animal do you think it will be, and how does he looks?
That would have to be a tiger.
A tiger? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, no, maybe a tiger. A panther, a black panther. And, but he would be a friendly one and not a scary one. Although there would be that edginess of him being scary, but but actually he's okay. He's gentle. He's like a gentle giant.
And how do you interact with it?
How do I interact with it? I just, I don't know. How do I interact? Stroke its head.
Hey, so he...
Say hello. Say hello. Yeah, I'm not going to say it rolls on its tummy like a cat because, that might be weird. But I think I'd interact with it with caution and respect and a bit of reverence.
He let you pet him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you continue your way. You can be followed by the panther or not. What do you think it would happen?
Oh yeah, the panther would just follow me. We would just be walking around the forest together,
Okay.
Just exploring.
And you get to a house. How do you think the house is?
Oh, the house would be like a crooked, rickety house that was falling down. It would be like one of those houses you get in a horror film. Although that would be weird in a tropical forest. I'm talking more about a jungle now, aren't I? So I've gone like for the jungle rather than the forest. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so that wouldn't really fit like a ramshackle hut. House would just be just really ramshackle.
Well, you enter the house and you start to look for something. What do you look for?
Oh my god! What do I look for? Pictures.
Pictures. Okay.
I look for pictures to see whether I can, find out who lives in the house or who lived in the house. Whether it's like maybe it's an abandoned house that's got vines and things growing through it as well.
Did you get the pictures at the end?
I find like a ripped picture of a family, but it's not complete.
What do you see on it?
I see a man, a woman, a dog.
Huh.
That's really weird. A dog in a jungle, which is getting weirder. And one child, but then another child, but the picture's like ripped, so you only get to see half of that child.
Half of the child. Okay. Well, that was fun, Rachel. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, that's such a weird story.
It was a nice story. I think I can relate that to Slowdive music in a way in my text. So,
okay, I'll be interested to translate that.
I'm very excited to hear your new album. I really love the last one. I think it's like one of the best comebacks ever. So let's see.
Oh, thank you. And you haven't heard this one yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I thought they would have let you hear it.
No.
Well, you should ask them. You should ask. That's silly. You should hear it if you're doing an interview.
Let's see. Well, thank you very much, Rachel. Send you a big hug and hope you have a nice day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Well, thanks for doing the interview.
No, thanks to you to speak to me. I have a lot of questions about the process behind this album and about Slowdive in general. So, yeah, I want to say to you that I have been pretty into shoegaze music and especially into your albums because in a way I feel like one of the missions or one of the objectives of this kind of music is to encapsulate the listener in sound, right?
Yeah, I think even from the very, the first sort of records that we made, and even, playing live, that was a big part of what we wanted to do, is just to create this very immersive kind of noise, you know, that was, and I think that's still important for us. Yeah.
I have a quote from a guy called David Tubb, who is a musicologist who studied with John Cage in the 40s. That, he says that the reason why he thinks music exists is because there were like prosodic interchanges between a mother and his baby, interchanges that provoke like the winkle between them. So in a way, he says that music, like communicating with these kind of sounds that are not words, is like a way of us to search a connection with our mother, right? Again, to regain those feelings, those memories.
Maybe he's right. Maybe we are sort of looking for our mothers in the music. Yeah. I mean, I think music performs so many functions for people, doesn't it? You know, I mean, it can be comforting. It can sort of it can create so many different emotions depending on the music. You can dance to it and everything. But I think for us, it's always wanting to feel the music, I think, as much as hear it, you know. Is that kind of vibration is important, you know. And even when you make the records, you know, in the early days, we never made records that we thought sounded good on the radio. We wanted to make records that sounded good when you played them really loud. And it's a different way of mixing a record, you know. So I think that part of it is important for us, for sure.
It's interesting to talk about this theory with a shoegaze musician because, well, you are encapsulated by sound, right? When you are in your mother stomach, for saying.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and you are hearing
reverberation.
Yeah.
What do you...
I was going to say maybe all shoegaze musicians just want to be back in the womb.
Yeah, it's like to be on a pool.
Yeah. Indeed.
What do you feel when you create like these textures, like these how do you say, like levels of sound in your music? I have like been seeing like YouTube videos and documentaries about you, and always when people talk about your music, they put like colors, right? Like pink backgrounds or water. I want to know like what's your appreciation? What do you see on your music when you close your own eyes?
I don't know. I don't really think about the music in terms of colors myself. I think I mean, I suppose I tend to, you know, because I spend so much time in studios, I tend to think of it in terms of white or pink noise or so I suppose that element I can kind of understand. But yeah, I guess it's a bit different when you're making the music, because I definitely respond to other people's music with colors, but I don't really feel that with Slowdive as much. Yeah, maybe I'm too close to it.
Yeah, maybe it's like trying to look at yourself, right?
Ah, that's deep. Maybe, yeah. I mean, there's definitely an element of that. It's, you know, and I think also when you make a record, you know, I certainly don't spend any time listening to the record once it's been made, you know, once it's been made into a piece of vinyl. I'll listen to it to check that it sounds good, and then I probably won't listen to that record again for, but I think that's just part of the creative process. I think you sort of have to, you're really ready to move on to something else then. And also for me, I don't really listen to other people's music much when I'm recording a record. I find it distracting. But then as soon as the record's done, that all I want to do is consume other people's music.
Yeah, I understand. Well, you have worked a lot on this record, so you must have not heard a lot of music in these few years, right?
Yeah, this record's taken 4 years. Yeah, give or take a few months, I guess. So, yeah, that's just how long it took with this one. And yeah, I suppose I haven't really been listening to a lot of music during that whole sort of process. Yeah, you do become very absorbed in your own project, and I'm not sure that's particularly healthy, but that's just sort of how I have to work. And I think there was a point where the band were like, look, we need to get someone else in to mix the record, and I think really they just wanted me to stop tinkering with it.
Oh, really? Why did you think you work so hard on this one in particular?
I mean, I do with all the records, to be honest. I mean, even the last one took a few years from start to finish. That's just the way I like to do it, and I think everyone else in the band is able to dip in and dip out, which is really healthy because it means that there is a perspective. They get some distance on it, and that's really good.
Well, you say that when you make a record, you tend not to listen to it for quite a while, right? So I want to know, like, have you heard your earlier records recently? Have you heard them?
No, I haven't listened to any of the earlier records for years. I think when we got back together in 2014, we all had to listen to the old records to sort of remember how we played stuff. But yeah, I just don't really have any desire to, really, personally. I mean, I guess it's all still very familiar to me. If I do hear stuff, if I hear it on someone's playlist or, it pops up wherever, it's obviously instantly familiar to me.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not that unusual for most musicians, I would think,
What did you feel when you listened to those early recordings of yourself?
I think it's quite hard for me to not sort of listen to them in quite critically, in terms of the way they sound or stuff like that. There'll still be stuff that I'll be like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or or wish we hadn't. You tend to. I still tend to listen to them probably rather than just listen to them as music. I tend to listen to them as still an ongoing project, which is probably wrong.
Yeah, that's probably why you don't listen to them.
Yeah, you're right.
Just to enjoy something when you hear it in that way, I suppose. Well, I saw the documentary that Pitchfork made about So Blacky to prepare for this interview. And one of the things that pop up to me that you said in there, it's that like you connect with teenagers because you were making music when you were teenagers, right? You deliver feelings that were how to say, like important for that time in life. But now that you reunite your self-titled album, I think also deliver that kind of feelings and that kind of emotions, and you still are connecting with teenagers all around the world. I would say that you are connecting with teenagers now more than ever. I want to know, like, how do you manage to keep delivering these feelings now that you are an adult?
I don't know really. I don't know why. I'm not really sure why Slowdive. I think a lot of what we do just has a certain feeling, but I don't think we really know why that happens. I mean, with this new record, the place where it started was very. I basically sent the band like 40 sketches that I made over the last few years that were, just electronic music that I was just making for myself. And when we talked about making another record, I thought it might be an interesting place to start the record if we started from some of these sort of electronic ideas that were all sort of instrumental. And it's just interesting to me that they kind of, once we all start working on them as a band, how they sort of work their way to becoming a Slowdive sounding or a Slowdive feeling track. It just seems to be where we coalesce as a band, that crossroads, that intersection where we sit as a band, where all our different musical influences meet up, is that sort of Slowdive spot. But I certainly I don't really understand, where that feeling comes from. Excuse me.
Oh, don't worry. It's interesting because, well, I also love Mojave 3. I think it's a great project, but in a way, I have like this feeling that, it carries some sensibilities that Slowdive have, but it doesn't sound like Slowdive. It sounds like its own thing. And I want to know, like, when you...
It's not Slowdive, right? That's why. It has me and Rachel involved, but it's not. Slowdive is very much the sum of its parts. Although I might write the songs, if I were to record them by myself, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't have the same kind of feelings that Slowdive has,
One of the things that I also was discussing with Rachel is like this idea that, well, Pygmalion, it was also like an electronic album, right? And it still sounds like Slowdive. And it was like a project that you work most on it, right? Like without the other members involved with.
Yeah, I kind of... I don't know. I suppose I forced that record on everyone else a little bit. It was sort of a project that I really, I was really into, and I think the rest of the band were less kind of into it as a record, and I think it probably took its toll on the band a little bit. I don't know. I think that was one of the big reasons we split up, not just the fact that we'd been dropped by Creation, but I think everyone felt a little sidelined by that record,
I think it's an interesting record because, well, the combination of this like guitar sound with electronic music influences, like this intelligent dance music influences, is something that, well, now is like very popular, right? But on 1998, that's the year when Pygmalion came out, right?
95.
95, yeah, no, it's more antique.
Yeah, it was a hard, I mean, even the term post-rock hadn't been invented then, so it was kind of, people just didn't know what to make of it, really. Creation were just like, well, what the fuck is this record, and they didn't know what to do with it. Yeah, I think I've said to, that perhaps if it had been put out on Warp or a different, a more electronic based label, it might have perhaps been examined in a different way. The fact that it came out on Creation, people were just like, I guess, just a bit confused by it, but I still really like the record, but I think it wouldn't be something I would do now. I kind of respect Slowdive as an entity much more than perhaps I did when I was 20 years old. I think I probably should have just made that as a solo artist and let Slowdive be Slowdive, but at the time that was the kind of music I wanted to make, and I guess it felt like it should be a Slowdive record to me at that point, but perhaps maybe it wasn't the right thing to do.
I don't know. I really like that record, and I know that now it's a fan favorite. It doesn't have like the same prestige as So Blacky has, but it is near that level of re-review. Yeah, people like that album a lot. And it's interesting that now that you are saying this to me, because, well, on your solo record and on Mojave Tree and all that old project, you didn't experiment with electronic music, but now on this new Slowdive album, you are, like coming back to what started Pygmalion in a way, from what I am feeling.
Yeah, I mean, after Pygmalion, I think I'd been so absorbed in that kind of very cold, sort of ambient music for so many, for a couple of years, and all I wanted to do after Slowdive split up was sort of learn how to write, a folk song, learn how to play acoustic guitar,
Yeah.
I was at a place where I couldn't even play the songs on an acoustic guitar, so for me that was the next experiment, was to really just figure out how to write a song that you could play on an acoustic guitar, and that kind of was what was that interested me at that point. But I've always loved electronic music and I've always listened to it, but I definitely took a few years off at that point, I think, just to reset, but yeah, I mean, certainly, this latest record kind of started its life in that world, and it's really interesting for me, like the journey to see where it's ended up.
Well, the title is quite stunning. I think Everything is Alive is a good statement. I want to know, like, what does it say to you?
We wanted a title that was, optimistic and hopeful, really, I think. Yeah, it just seems to suit the record in some ways. I think there's a lot of different emotions on the record. I think it's, there's obviously quite a light kind of poppy side to the record, and then there's some darker material as well. But the record sort of came out of COVID, which was obviously a dark time for everyone, all over the world. It's been such a crazy sort of ride for everyone, and both Simon lost his dad, Rachel lost her mum.
Oh, I'm pretty sad about that.
Yeah. So, and I think like sort of recording the record was part of the way that they dealt with their grief a little bit, and so I think we wanted something that reflected a bit more hope, just sort of coming out of that, really. It felt like, I don't think we certainly didn't consciously take the record in any particular direction, but I think having, getting to the end point where we had all these songs that we thought this makes a pretty good record, and it just felt, to come back to the title again, it felt like there was a pretty good title for what we had,
Yeah, I understand. It's like the polar opposite of what you were living at the time.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. To put it more succinctly than me, yes, you're right, yeah.
And it's also like a statement that is like, well, it's important to have like the memory, right, of these things, that everything is alive, like everything could be beautiful in a way, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we're not saying everything needs to be happy-go-lucky, blah, 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 but yeah, there's a duality to everything, and it's all about darkness and light, isn't it? And the little spaces we find between that make us happy, and what, and I think life is generally about just finding those little moments, and the thing with the whole COVID and everything people went through with that, I suppose, is it really does give everyone a perspective, that perhaps, as a sort of world population, we didn't have before, and it's changed the way people are living their lives,
Do you know this Latin phrase that says "amor fati memento mori"? That is like, remember that you are going to die and love
Right.
you.
Yeah, it's I suppose that's probably the most simple truth, make the most of it, because everyone dies, right? So, and you're not here for long, but yeah, I like that phrase.
Yeah, I like it too a lot. It brings perspective to life, I think, in a way. Like to not take things for granted.
Yeah, I think that's always the biggest mistake you can make. Yeah.
How do you do to not take things for granted?
Well, I mean, I suppose, not to sound like too much of a hippie, but I think you have to be thankful for, what opportunities you do have, and, I mean, I think, we've been very lucky as a band, to sort of have a second sort of bite of the cherry, as it were, to sort of be able to sort of come back together and to make records, 20 years after we split up.
Yeah.
And I guess we've tried not to take that for granted, really, and to use the opportunity to sort of, make records we can be sort of proud of,
It was a big surprise for you, the receivement that you have when you reunite for the first time.
Yeah, it was a big surprise. I don't think we really realized how much the internet had kind of spread the music out into the world,
Yeah.
And, stuff like Greg Araki's films, Nowhere, and Mystery Skin, and I think, in those sort of 20 years that we weren't making music, we were sort of blessed by the internet, I suppose, in that suddenly we were in an era where people could investigate music, and the fact that we hadn't been particularly successful, that we weren't familiar to people, I suppose, was I guess kind of, if you're a young kid and you have this amazing tool where you can just find as much great music as you've got time to listen to them, I think you're going to gravitate to less familiar music eventually, you know. So we were kind of lucky in that respect, I think. But yeah, it wasn't really until we'd started to do a few gigs and we realized, well, you know, this is weird because we're playing to more people now than we ever did, you know, back when we were, you know, when we made those first sort of 3 records.
I understand. I was telling Rachel that Slowdive was particularly important on my teenage years because it was like the biggest influence of this music scene that I was involved into on Mexico City. And
oh, right. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, here were like a lot of shoegaze that there still is a dream pop bands that really love Slowdive, and the aesthetic, the sound, everything is like Slowdive. A lot of bands, yeah.
Yeah.
Very popular.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 27. Yeah, this is like from when I was like 17, 18.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean it's so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure like without the internet, Slowdive would never have had, you know, any kind of resurrection. So we're definitely lucky with our timing a little bit, you know.
I was like trying to remember stories of bands that have like this big comeback after they were like kind of ignored in the biggest schemes, and I just have like 2 names, and it's like the Velvet Underground and Pixies on my mind. I think that's pretty good companion to be with.
I mean, that's brilliant company to be in, that, you know. Yeah, I don't know if we're as good as those, but I mean, it's definitely a rare thing, you know. I mean, it is a rare thing. And I guess like the Velvets were in their 40s when they got back together.
Yeah.
I remember that, the songs for Drella and all that stuff, and yeah, I mean, I would never put us in that company, to be honest. That's like too. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the Velvets are a genuinely revolutionary band. That, you know, that we're not at that level, but I think that we've, you know, whatever it is, but there's definitely a certain amount of luck involved with our story, you know, for sure. Yeah.
Have you read like new reviews of So Blacky, or have you seen that album on maybe the new tops of 100 best albums ever, or from the 90s or whatever, that they are like writing like from 10 years to now?
I mean, I don't really follow that sort of stuff much. I mean, occasionally I'll get sent something like you know, like I think someone sent me like a dream pop compilation Pitchfork did. But I think that was a Mojave 3 record that was in that, which surprised me. But yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, there is no question that the band has been sort of reevaluated, you know.
Yeah.
And we certainly welcome a good review, because I mean, we couldn't buy a good review back in the day, you know. I think all 3 albums we released never really got any good reviews that I can remember, so I guess this kind of balances things out a little bit, for sure, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I know that you were like pretty much like, well, that the press hit a lot on you and punch you and punish you. And now that, well, almost every how do you say, list that I read about the best albums of the 90s have like a couple of Slowdive album on there, and shoegaze album on the top 10. It's always like 2 or even the 3 of Slowdive. And it must be like pretty interesting for you as an artist to have like your art revalued that much and to become much more appreciated and in high regard. I think it's like interesting.
Yeah, I think like for us as a band, the fact that we're able to come, you know, to South America and play shows or go to Australia and play shows, I think that's the real exciting part for us
Okay.
at this point, you know, because we never really got a chance to do that. You know, we never played a festival first time round. We didn't play one festival ever, you know. You know, we did a couple of tours in America. We did a few tours in Europe, but we didn't really, you know, we never went to Japan or we never went to a lot of places, you know. There just wasn't a kind of a call for it, you know. So I think, you know, being able to sort of do this now and you know, and play to a, you know, to an audience of, you know, a lot of young people, but also, you know, people that we the same age as us who would have been into the band at that point, and I guess never had a chance to see us then, you know. That's kind of cool, and I think that makes us, you know, that makes us happy, that sort of side of it. But you know, again, you know, I think we still get excited about making new music, you know, and I think that's sort of less than sort of thinking about, you know, the old records and stuff like that, which are brilliant to play live, but yeah, it's you know, for us, the opportunity to sort of be able to make new records is a really big part of it, for sure.
That's great. And what did you learn the most about making this record?
I think like I really learned a lot about everyone in the band in terms of where their heads are musically. You know, we're quite polarized as a band, which I hadn't really realized before. Like when I first sent the like ideas through with these sort of electronic sketches, like Nick was like, oh, well, these would be great, we can use these between the songs, you know, as sort of little interludes.
Okay.
But then Simon was like, oh, this is great, we don't even really have to do much, we can just make them a bit more ambient and we've got a whole record, you know. So it was kind of like trying, you know, it's kind of navigating a way between those polarized viewpoints, you know, and making a record that everyone's proud of was interesting, you know. I felt like we were more polarized making this record than we've been before, but sort of in a good way, really, you know. It was kind of an interesting journey to sort of, you know, get to a point where everyone's kind of like, yes, okay, this is really fun, this is great, you know.
Well, talking about all the genres that you love and that you have worked with, I want to know what's the thing that you like the most about ambient music, and what's the thing you like the most about folk music?
Sorry, what was the first question?
Yeah, what's the thing you like the most about ambient music?
Oh, okay. I think they tickle different parts of your brain in some ways, you know. You know, I mean, you know, for me as a musician who likes sort of funny noises, the ambient, you know, I just kind of get lost in the production side of things, whereas, you know, folk music for me is usually much more about the emotion and, you know, the lyrics, really, I suppose. And
I like the storytelling, right?
Sorry?
Like the storytelling.
Storytelling. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, ambient music tells a story, but it's not linear, you know, and I suppose most songwriting is quite linear, although some of the more interesting songwriting, like you know, like I was just trying to think of a non-linear songwriter, but I suppose there's something about like listening to a Burt Jansch record or a Leonard Cohen record where it's I suppose Leonard Cohen's different because his records are quite produced, but when it's just a vocal and the guitar, there's nowhere to hide, is there? It's very direct, and so I think that speaks to a different part of people's hearts. Yeah.
Interesting, because I read a commentary yesterday of a person that says that he loves a Slowdive approach to lyrics because most shoegaze bands are just focused on sounds, right? But that he feels like Slowdive also delivers like quite a story or a feeling with the words, that you are not just making sounds with the mouth just to sing something. And I kind of agree with that.
I think we arrive at that point by just making noises, though.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, like, I know that as a songwriter, there's one song on the record, Andalusius plays, which came from which was a song I wrote for a solo record, and the lyrics kind of come first,
Mm-hmm.
But usually with a Slowdive, it's the sounds of things that do come first, and then you get to a point where you're like, right, how do for instance, like a song like Kisses, for a long time the only real part of the lyric that was discernible was kisses, so the song ended up sort of, when we realized we couldn't get away from that, it was integral part of the tune, you sort of write the song around that kind of discernible part of the lyric. And I feel like that happens a lot with Slowdive, whereas it wouldn't be how I would approach writing a song with an acoustic guitar. So I think you end up finding a different, you respond to the space in a different way, I suppose. So I think in some ways both viewpoints are correct for Slowdive. We are a typical shoegaze band in one respect, but I think we're never happy. I think we always try and take it a little bit further.
Yeah.
Sometimes successfully and sometimes not, but yeah.
Yeah, well, you have been working on this album for 4 years, so.
Yeah, it took a little while, yeah. But yeah, I think that's just sometimes records take a bit longer than others, It would be nice if we could make records a bit quicker. But, in some way, it is all about the journey, it's really, and that part of it's really enjoyable, I mean, it can be frustrating at times, and you can feel a bit like you 2 steps forward and 3 steps back sometimes, but just sort of being able to be on that journey, I think, so really it's we're lucky to be able to do that.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much for this interview, Neil. I need to cut this and finish this, but it was a privilege to talk to you. I love your music since I was like 15 or 16 years old, and I still have my vinyl records of So Blacky and Pygmalion. Yeah, I think they are still great for me.
Well, that's very nice of you, and really nice to talk to you. And yeah, maybe we'll see you at one of the shows.
Yeah, you need to come to Mexico soon, maybe. That would be great.
Yeah, we'd love to come back. We had a great time last time we were there.
Suscríbete a nuestro podcast y escucha las entrevistas más relevantes de Warp en Warp Talks.